Hello, and welcome to the Bock Community Garden New Gardener Orientation for 2020. I'm Lizzie Parker, and I will be your narrator for this video. This isn't how we usually do things. If you have any questions about something covered in this video or not covered in this video, please email us and I or one of the other committee members will get back to you as quickly as we can. Thank you for your patience and understanding in these unusual times, and let's get started. Once upon a time, there was an empty old farming field that had been lying fallow for years, collecting weeds. In 2006, the Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy purchased the nearly 20-acre parcel for $3 million with the help of many private and public donors. This parcel was then transferred to the city of Middleton, who agreed to manage the new Bock Community Forest, following a plan carried out by adaptive restoration. As part of the deal, the city's sustainability committee created a community garden on 1 acre of the property with the understanding that the gardeners would participate in the restoration and stewardship of the forest. That's why every year we partner with the Friends of Pheasant Branch and Adaptive Restoration to have work sessions that work in the prairie in addition to nurturing some unique features inside the garden. In 2010, the land was cleared and the first plots and walkways were laid out. The following year, our wonderful shed was built by Operation Fresh Start under the direction of Middleton Public Lands Director Penny Clean. In 2013, Ryan Hawkos designed and built the stairs leading up to the garden from Highland Way. In 2016, our fantastic new tool rack was built, and the following year, rabbit fencing was installed at the base of the deer fence, and we all celebrated the end of Bunnigeddon. One of those unique features I mentioned earlier is our native plant nursery beds located in the corners of the garden, as well as the pollinator bed located next to the raised beds. We also have a native demonstration garden outside of the fence located along Highland Way, where we grow many species of native plants and flowers. Outside the fence behind the garden, we have a tree nursery where we grow native species of trees that are transplanted into the oak savanna of Bock Forest and other parts of the Pheasant Branch Conservancy. This year, some of our trees may go to help restoration efforts in the Pheasant Branch corridor impacted by the flooding in 2018. But we don't just grow trees for the forest, we also grow some for us. We have a collection of fruit trees that grow pears, apples, and peaches. The fruit are available to all of our gardeners to sample in modest amounts. Just don't pick them before they're ripe. We'll send out a notice when each fruit is ready to pick. The apples especially like to look ready before they are, so be patient. We also have a cane berry patch where we grow currants and raspberries for everyone's enjoyment. The bumblebees particularly enjoy the raspberry flowers, so be careful when looking for ripe berries. Our children's garden is also open to all, and there you will find a strawberry patch that is quite productive in June. The children's garden is still open this year, but we will not be holding any events. We also have a small dedicated space for growing food that gets donated to one of our local food pantries. We encourage our gardeners to plant a couple plants, or maybe even a row, to donate as well. If you have any extra produce that is of reasonable size and on the list of desired produce, we also accept that for donation. Not all produce is accepted, as some vegetables are over-donated or maybe too large. If it's too big for you to deal with, they probably don't want to either. Donated produce can be dropped off in the coolers on the shed porch. All donated produce should be free of dirt and pests. Deliveries to the food pantry are picked up at 10 a.m. Mondays and Fridays during the main growing season. Bock Garden is an organic community garden, so we ask that you abide by organic gardening principles. Take out anything that you bring into the garden. That includes row covers, plant covers, zip ties, and any other materials that don't decompose in a season. Plastic in general is not allowed unless it is sturdy enough to weather multiple growing seasons. For instance, plastic ground covers are not allowed. No meat, dairy, pet feces, or non-composted livestock manure should be used, as they may harbor disease. No non-organic fertilizers, herbicides, or chemical pesticides are allowed either. Decorative rocks must be at least 6 inches across and weigh less than 50 pounds. Mulches used in the garden beds must be biodegradable in a reasonable amount of time and free from weed seeds. For instance, the wood chips provided by the garden for the pathways between plots should only be used for the pathways and should not go into your plot. They take a couple of years to break down and can be quite frustrating for the next gardener who has to work your plot. Here is the list of plants that are not allowed in the garden. They fall into 3 main categories: poisonous, invasive, or woody. To simplify, we've listed woody and invasive plants together as there is a lot of overlap between those groups. Poisonous plants not allowed at Bock include a lot of pretty flowers, including foxglove, delphinium, morning glories, and daffodils. They may be pretty, but they can make someone, like, say, a child that has escaped their supervisor, quite sick. Invasive plants that are not allowed at Bock include mint, horseradish, and morning glories. I'm bringing morning glories up again because they are personally the bane of my existence. They may seem harmless, and some annual varieties are, but the perennial varieties will spread like crazy if not rigorously kept in check. Plus, the seeds are poisonous, so please, please, please don't plant any or I will find you and I will have words for you. Very polite words, but stern. And no one wants to see that. Anyway, some good news. Chive, dill, fennel, and oregano are allowed if, big if here, they are carefully controlled, as they would love to colonize your neighbor's plot if you only let them. Alright, a couple more rules before we can get to the fun stuff. We have a bike rack for your bikes. Keep them there, not inside the fence where they will block pathways. Pets, I love them. You love them, but not everybody does. Keep them outside the fence. Kids are welcome in the garden, but we request that those under 12 years of age have adult supervision, lest they wander into other people's plots. Speaking of which, do not yourself venture where you do not have permission to go. Do not pick produce you did not grow. Be a good neighbor. If your produce does wander off without permission, please let us on the committee know. We can't do anything about it if we don't know it's happening. Sometimes that means putting out rabbit traps. Live capture, of course. And speaking of bunnies, make sure you close the gates behind you when entering and leaving. In the summer, you can see bunnies sitting out behind the back fence just waiting for someone to leave the gate open. I'm not kidding. Here's a picture I took last year of a cottontail that I and 4 other gardeners spent half an hour herding out of the garden. We don't want to do that again. Here's a map of the garden with some of the features we would normally take you on a tour to see if we were doing the orientation in person per normal. But here we are, online. So you'll have to use your imagination. At past the fence in the northwest corner is where the wood chip and compost piles are. The wood chips are for keeping the pathways neat and weed-free, and the compost pile is for making things you plant grow better. Each gardener is responsible for taking care of the half of the pathway adjacent to their plot. You're also responsible for adding compost to your plot. That one might seem a little bit more obvious. Keep in mind, the compost pile is just for mature compost that we procure for everyone's use. All composting material from your plot should happen in your plot, using whatever method works best for you. The cardboard pile is located under a big blue tarp and some wood pallets just outside the north gate. The cardboard is the secret ingredient that goes under the wood chips in the pathways that actually keeps the weeds from growing there. It is very necessary and we never have enough. Since we're all doing more online shopping than usual, put those Amazon boxes to good use and use them in the garden. If you have extra, or are one of those rare and beautiful people who have access to lots of big, continuous sheets of cardboard from appliance boxes or something, please drop them off in the cardboard pile. Make sure they're tucked under the tarp so they don't get ruined in the rain. Big sheets with no holes and minimum tape is best. Thank you so much, you're my hero. Oh look, more rules. But these are important. Well, all the rules are important, but these are extra so, because these are the ones people seem to break the most. Don't be like them. Be your best gardener. Rule number 1, return the tools after you use them. Don't forget them in your plot and leave. Number 2, clean the tool head. Get all that dirt off while in your plot. Dirt carries weed seeds and soil pathogens. No one wants your weed seeds, and you don't want theirs. So get all that dirt off in your plot. We've got wire brushes to help with that, or you can just grab a big wood chip. Whatever gets the job done. Just remember, do it at your plot. Not my plot, not your neighbor's plot, and definitely not at the tool rack. The tool rack doesn't want your weeds either, and knocking all the dirt off your tools at the rack just builds up places for weeds to grow. Do it at your plot, and return those tools nice and shiny to the rack. I only want to see shiny shovels. Got that? Number 3. This is new this year. Wash the tool handles off with soap and water at the spigot before and after use. Since water is an important part of that, we won't be putting the tools out until the city turns our water on. Probably not until late April. But we're going to get that done as soon as we can. If you can get your own tools to use, we highly recommend it, but we know not everyone can, and we will get the tools out as soon as it is safe to do so. Rule number 4. Use the correct tool for the job. This is the most common way that tools get broken. Someone uses them incorrectly. The biggest offender is confusing pitchforks and spading forks. Pitchforks are long and spindly and are good for picking up lots of light things like wood chips or hay. Spading forks are short and sturdy for digging. Each year, someone tries to dig with the pitchfork and breaks or bends the tines. Number 5. If you do break a tool, please tell us. Tools break even if they are being used correctly. Our tools live busy lives, and breaking is just part of the circle of life for tools. We don't blame you, and we'll probably thank you if you let us know something is broken so that we can get it out of circulation and repair or replace it. To be invited back to the garden next year, it's important to maintain your gardener in good standing status. You can do this by following the rules, maintaining your plot, completing best practices, which will also be online this year, completing your work session requirement, and being a respectful member of the community. This includes the birds, bugs, and critters we share our garden with. Approximately once a month, the rules coordinator will assess everyone's plots to make sure we are all keeping up with our plots. Everyone will get an email with their evaluation results and any comments or concerns the assessor has about the plots. Criteria that are assessed include whether there are weeds growing in the plot or pathway, whether the path is in good repair and is free from obstructions, whether any plants are encroaching on or overshading neighbors' plots, if there are any overripe produce or dead plants left to rot in the open, if there is trash or debris in the plot, or if there are any forbidden plants or pests present. Between June 15th and September 15th, plots should also be at least 75% planted. I'm going to put extra emphasis on that overshading point. Don't plant your sunflowers where they'll block your neighbor's sun. It's not cool. Don't be that person. Finally, all plots will need to be cleaned up for winter by November 1st. More details on that will be provided as the growing season winds down. Work sessions! So, how are work sessions going to work if we can't gather in groups or be within 6 feet of each other? We're still figuring that out. One thing is for certain, our usual work sessions aren't going to happen anytime soon. This means the work session requirement will change. Right now, we're looking at giving gardeners individual tasks or projects. Some of these might be a one-off task, while others might be season-long projects. We're going to have to be flexible and understanding to get through this together, and we really appreciate your patience and understanding as we figure this out. Our work sessions aren't the only things being impacted by the current pandemic. We'll also have to change some behavior when gardening in order to keep each other safe. Maintain the 6-foot social distancing guidelines. Use your own tools whenever possible. Wash the handles of the communal tools with soap and water before and after use. Use a barrier when touching the gate latches. For example, I use a handkerchief. A big caveat to this rule is that if you can't wash or dispose of the barrier after using it, then you should just use your bare hands. Always wash your hands with soap and water before and after visiting the garden. Rinse your garden produce with water. Don't use soap. Eating soap is bad for you. And most importantly, remember that gloves do not replace proper hand sanitation procedures. If you are using gardening gloves, keep in mind that they are as contaminated as whatever they touch. Treat and wash them accordingly. Finally, we can move on to some fun things. Meet your garden committee members. We're all volunteers, so be nice. We're all that stands between you and a lawless Mad Max gardenscape. We meet each month, typically on the second Tuesday. All gardeners are welcome to attend or submit questions. We have switched to online meetings, so you'll need to request a Zoom invite if you want to join us. Otherwise, the Bock Garden email is the best way to reach us. We do have some open spaces on the committee, so let us know if you'd like to help out. One perk of joining the committee is that you're eligible for a second plot after your second year on the committee. Alright, enough about us, let's move on. Since we won't be able to spend as much time in person with you as we normally would, we want to give you a few starting tips for success in the garden. We'll have some more tips in the best practices thing in the future, but here are a few to get you started. Gonna repeat this again. Use the appropriate tools and maintain them. Over here we've got an example of an improperly cleaned tool. I don't want to see any of that. Apply a generous amount of leaf compost, that's the stuff we provide out back, before you plant, whether that is in the spring or before succession planting. When shoveling the leaf compost or wood chips from the piles, remove from the edges and lower areas of the piles. Get your receptacles as close to the pile as possible to reduce the amount that is spilled and left behind. Apply hay mulch when the growing season is underway after the soil warms up. If there was hay covering your garden over winter, uncover the soil where you want to plant to allow the soil to warm up for 1 or 2 weeks. Warm soil is necessary for seed germination. As your plants grow, you can then push the hay back up to the stems. If possible, water plants at the base. Don't be like my husband and lightly spray your plants with water. You and a garden hose are not going to reproduce the same conditions as rain. You want the water to infiltrate the soil, so get that hose right up against those plants and concentrate the water where you want it. A light spraying of water will evaporate before it infiltrates, which just makes for good dirt bath conditions for the birds to enjoy, and doesn't really get any water to your plants. Early identification of weeds is key. Remove them from the stem when they're small and it's easy, and then let them dry out before composting them. One gardening adage goes that any plant out of place is a weed. You don't need to break out the species identification handbook to know if something isn't where you want it. Don't compost rhizomous plants. I'll explain why in the next slide, but you can see a couple examples of how big these kinds of plants can get underground compared to what we see at the surface. That one on the bottom is some bindweed I pulled out of the pathway for my garden last year. This is why I don't like morning glories. They're related. Anyway, take diseased plants or rotting produce out of the garden. Composting diseased plants just propagates those diseases in the soil where they can persist to infect your plants or your neighbor's plants next year. Rotting produce attracts pests, and no one wants rats in their plot. Harvest the communal fruit and berries only when they are ripe and in small quantities so that everyone can enjoy them. If you have any extra produce, consider donating it to our local food pantry. We'll be doing twice weekly donation pickups once the season gets going. Here's a couple examples of our most common early season weeds. Dandelions are fairly well known. They're easiest to pull out when they're small, so stay on top of them or you'll be needing to use a weeding tool to get them out. The roots can regrow new plants, so you really want to get that out and not just cut the top off. Don't let them go to seed, as each plant can produce up to 20,000 seeds. This is one of our edible weeds, so you can take sweet revenge on it growing in your plot by eating it, if that's your thing. Quackgrass is an example of one of those rhizomous weeds I mentioned earlier. In addition to small, fibrous roots, they grow underground stems that spread out to send up more plants. These rhizomes break easily, and the pieces can produce new plants, so it's important to get as much of the rhizomes out as possible. The best approach is to carefully loosen the soil with a spading fork and then hand dig up the rhizomes. Never use a rototiller on quackgrass, as that just multiplies it like crazy. Once you've removed all the quackgrass, cover the area with some mulch to smother any new growth, and then immediately pull up any plants that do grow. Rhizomous plants like quackgrass and bindweed cannot be composted, as the rhizomes will persist in the compost and grow new plants wherever the compost is spread. Always have a plastic bag with you or another trash receptacle when you're weeding in order to be able to remove any rhizomous weeds you pull out from your garden. We'll send out approximately monthly newsletters on relevant weeds, pests, and other topics throughout the year, so keep an eye out for those to learn more about our common weeds, pests, and the best ways to handle them. Thank you all so much for your time and for sticking in there with me on this. As the community garden, we are all in this together. Remember to be understanding and respectful of the garden, its rules, and each other. We appreciate your patience and understanding during these unusual times, and if you have any concerns, comments, suggestions, maybe even compliments, please feel free to contact us on the committee. We want to make sure everyone has a happy, productive gardening season. I will talk to you all again when we go over our best practices gardening advice. I hope to see you all out and about the garden, just at an appropriate distance. Happy gardening!